Yeah, so good morning, everyone. This is John Pierce with USGS, and I'm part of the collaboration team with Carolina and Amy Holman and Simon Stevenson. And so I just want to let folks know the kind of the purpose of these calls is to share information by different groups on important topics that IARPC has identified, that we're trying to, find out what different people are doing, thoughts people have on these different topics, and really to create some new collaborations to make more progress on these topics. So as Carolina introduced today, our topic today is sort of archaeological sites and issues in relation to changes in the Arctic, coastal erosion, and what we really want people to think about during these presentations is how are these efforts that you're going to see today maybe similar or different to what you're seeing, and are there other ways for us to all think about this issue, and more importantly, how can we collaborate to make some better progress on this and other important topics. So if you can keep that in mind during the presentations, then that will be a way for us to have discussions afterward. So thanks.
Thanks, John. So should I begin here?
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. As was already said, my name is Joe Keeney. I'm the archaeologist for the National Petroleum Reserve. And today I'm going to talk about this past summer's field work, which is a continuation of field work that started in 2016, focusing on sites that are susceptible to coastal erosion. So a little bit of background with this project. It started in 2016, and I actually came on to BLM from the Park Service last December. So the previous year was mostly done focusing on the survey of some of these known sites that were thought to be susceptible, and just kind of getting an idea of the degree of erosion that was occurring, and more particularly the potential effects that the erosion might have on cultural sites. And so we found that there were through analyzing the photographs and documenting, mapping everything out, there were a few sites that were clearly at risk of being gone in the near future. Some not as high risk, but we tried to get out to at least we were hoping to get to 5, but this past summer we were able to get to 3 different sites, and those are what I'll be talking about today. And so a little bit of background. Here's the National Petroleum Reserve, and this is the area that we were focusing on. But before actually getting into the field work from this summer, I'd like to give a little bit of background, just to kind of give an idea of the importance of this work. And this is that cultural sites are just going to be gone. It's there's not really any way to protect them except through mitigation and trying to collect what information we can before they're gone, because otherwise there's just not getting anything back. So this is an aerial photo of Qalluvik, and Tommy Kunyak, who's also on the call. He was actually able to come out with us for a few days, and this is on his mother's allotment out by Point Lonely. And here we have overlaid over the aerial photo, or just features that were and are there at the site. So this photograph is from 1948, and you can see highlighted here in blue is the rough coast edge of the terrace there before it drops down to the beach. So just to give you an idea of the erosion. So we've got the coastal plain above, and the beach below. Well, the coastal plain is below on the image, and then the beach is above that. So this is 1948, and then we have in 1979, roughly the erosion edge has moved a few meters. then in 2000, when this rough image is from, the coastline doesn't look to have changed considerably, but then we have 2009, and then today the coastline is roughly, or the erosion edge is roughly where that green line is. So you can trace back historically just how things have moved further south as the coastline's been eroded. Now, to give a slightly clearer view of this, here is Qalluvik as it was this past July. You can see the standing house. This is the house that Tommy Kuniak's Nagyak's mother lived in when she was a young child, and then there are other features to the towards the upper right from the house. It's towards the lower left, so you can see the terrace edge here. And this is last summer, and based off of the topography and the patterned ground, you can kind of estimate where the edge is today, as you can see in this white line. Now, this is a blurry photo from actually from video. This is a screenshot from a video that was taken in 2009 as they were flying past Qalluvik, and based off the ground, the coastline is roughly about here today, and so you can see the there's been considerable erosion since 2009. This is 2006. This is a still photo, and so everything's much clearer. Here we have several different features that are of importance here, because this is where the coastline is today. So you can see the one to the right. It was actually partially there this past summer, but it's mostly gone today. And there looks to have been a walled structure, fenced area to the left. That left red circle, that's gone. And I'm not yet sure what might have been in that center circle, but possibly some debris or posts. There were several posts sticking out of the ground today. So working with Tommy, I'm hoping that we can maybe figure out what some of these are, and at least have a record of what used to be there. So these are gone today. Here's Qalluvik in 2002. You can see roughly where the coast erosion edge was at that point. Here it is today. And here is a photograph from 1978. Everything's a little bit hard to make out here, but you can see, pointing to some of the features in the house today that's still there, and the extent of the beach. And there is roughly where the erosion edge is today. And here are two whaleboats. These are photographs from 2007. And so these Yankee whaleboats, which came here up to Alaska sometime in either the late 19th or early 20th century. These were located about a kilometer or so away from the house, so you can actually see the house in both of these images in the background. Here they are in 2006, and you can make out the one boat clearly here, and then the other boat is actually the bow is actually in the very bottom right portion of the picture. Here's 2009, and the other boat that was to the west, that's here, and here it is again in this. Again, this is a video screenshot, but you can make out the western boat, but this is roughly where the other boat should have been, and that's gone. So, there it is in 2009. One of the boats was gone, and today they're both gone. And just you know, this isn't an in-depth analysis, but just to give you an idea of what's visible from Qalluvik. Here are some lapse times and the distance as eroded, and it's not even all the way across, of course, but you know, just measuring from the same point perpendicular to the house at Qalluvik to gauge a rough idea of erosion. Here we have distance and average rates over the span of time, and so you can see that it's eroded nearly 90 meters since 1948 when that first aerial photo was taken. So you know, it's a pretty rapid process that we're finding, and it's encroaching more and more every year towards the features, towards the house that's still there. And so we're hoping to gather what information we can. So here's a map of where we actually did our work past summer. First, I'll be talking about the Ugamak site, which is down near the mouth of the Kogru River. And here's in the top left, you can see an image of what's actually there. This is the remains of a sod house. We don't have much information yet, but I'm still working on that currently. But the traditional land use inventory for the North Slope says that this house was lived in by Horace Ugamak, who was associated with a reindeer herding corral, reindeer herding operation, and corral is actually a couple miles to the west of where these sod house remains are. And so you can see in the bottom right, we did some excavation to get an idea of how the house was built, you know, the foundation size and shape, and particularly of interest are the ways the houses were actually constructed. And this is a pattern that's seen and is fairly unique to a lot of these early 20th century sod houses, with the vertical construction of how the actual planks, the logs are laid versus, you know, horizontally placed, as you might think of like Lincoln logs when constructing a cabin. And this is Charlotte Ugamak, and she came out with us, and she acted as a family representative. So she was there with us, and we were hoping to have her son out there with us too, but he was unable to make it. And so she helped inform where she could about you know, what we might find, and just keep an eye out for anything that might be of importance to the family, and so I continue to consult with her on what's on the ongoing efforts to record everything. And we're currently in the process of cataloging everything and taking photographs. I don't actually have any photographs of most artifacts that were collected, but while she helped us dig, we recovered mostly a lot of bits of metal, you know, things like pieces of traps and cartridge shells, and a lot of bones, caribou or reindeer, seal bones, bird bones, things of that nature. So we're going to go through and catalog everything, and then hopefully have a pretty good story about you know, the life of Horace Ugamak and what we found there. So just to give you an idea of what we found, there's parts of a stove up in the top left, and then we've got some of the remaining sod blocks you can see in the top right, and then really interesting are the logs for the house constructed out of hewn driftwood, which is pretty cool. So it's all important for how people live, how they constructed their houses on the north slope along the coast. And then the next site that I'll talk about is the reindeer corral. That is just a few miles to the west of the Ugamak site, and the traditional land use inventory has a few different names associated with the corral operation, including Horace Ugamak, Charlotte's stepfather, and it's kind of hard to make out in the photograph here, but you can see lines of vertical posts that made up the fence, and so this was for driving the reindeer that were brought up from when the reindeer herding operation started out of Barrow in the early 1900s, after they were brought up from the Seward Peninsula. And what we did here was by the coastal edge, there was a dense concentration, or is and was a dense concentration of mostly reindeer bones, and so we did a very broad, rapid excavation to collect as much of this as we could, and so this should be able to give us some ideas about the ages of animals and just how they were butchered, what parts were left behind, what parts got taken away, and so we skimmed the surface and dug down and collected bones from 5-meter by 40-meter area, and so we'll hopefully get those analyzed sometime over the next couple of years and identified and everything. And so here's some images of the fence. Another important part of this too was mapping this in at high resolution as well. So taking points at every single one of these vertical posts and getting as many photographs. There have been lots of photographs of this already, but making sure that we've got you can never have too many of them, and so just trying to thoroughly document the site. And here's the excavation as it was occurring, and then this is pretty typical of what we were finding, a lot of bones, and then we found some cartridge shells and things like little bits of glass, and then kind of the normal stuff that washes up on the shore. And then the final site that I'll talk about is, as I was discussing earlier, is Qalluvik, up by up by Point Lonely. And here we have a picture of Lillian Nagyak at the sod house that she lived at when she was a little girl, and she still lives in Ugamak. We were hoping to get her out there with us, but she wasn't able to make it out there with us. But she was able to tell me some stories about the house and about the land that there were multiple families that actually lived here, and see, here's a photograph that her son Kunyak Tommy was able to share with me, and this is Lillian's mother, and in front of the house. And then here we have the house today, and so there's Kunyak. He came out for the last few days that we were out there, and down in the bottom photo here was the focus of excavating. Let's see. So this was a structure at Qalluvik that that turned out to be like a storage shed, like a sort of like a garage. You can see the ice cellar, and then most of the artifacts that were recovered out of here were things like trap pieces and parts of like an old Brownie camera and you know, tools and drill bits and things like that. So you know, it was not really the domestic items that you might think of, like, you know, spoons and knives and forks and, you know, parts of beds and that kind of stuff. So that was really interesting, and so we tried to get a good record of this, and then the house. The house, we did a detailed mapping of this and try to get an inventory of everything we could, and we're hopefully going to make it back there next summer, so that and go out there with Tommy and maybe pull up the floorboards and see if there's anything that might still be there, and you know, see if we can do any more. There's plenty that can still be recorded. You know, it's just a matter of the difficulties and with logistics and getting out there. So yeah, so that's the basic story of what we did this past summer. So I'd like to field any questions that anybody might have.
Hi, this is Karen. I was wondering if the condition of the coast is still usable when it's slumping like that.
How do you mean usable?
Could people live in a cabin out there and climb down, launch boats, fish?
I think so. I mean, you wouldn't want to have a house on the slumped in area, but the ground seems pretty stable as long as it's far enough from the edge. Once the permafrost starts thawing out, it starts getting eaten away from the bottom, and then it slumps down. So as long as you're far enough back from the edge, it seems to be okay.
Yeah, and Joe, I don't know if you want to talk about the rate of erosion at the Point Lonely area, but that's something that USGS has been working on, and that area around Point Lonely has some of the fastest shoreline change rates in terms of erosion, I think, for anywhere in the North Slope. Is that right?
Yeah, this is something. Delving into the literature on the erosion rates is I've only done from the air photos. I haven't had a chance to actually dig through the reports, but yeah, to my knowledge, yeah, it's been particularly bad on the Beaufort Sea coast. But there's not much more that I like. There are plenty of people that are far more qualified to talk about the erosion rates.
Yeah, so USGS, what was it, in 2015 and also this year, they provided an update on shoreline change rates for the whole North Slope region, and now they're going to start working on Western Alaska. And so that area on either side of Point Lonely, I think, was identified as the fastest changing in terms of, you know, erosion rate.
Wow.
So that would be a place to highlight, to look for potential sites that would be lost.
Yeah.
And that's all in relation to the declines of sea ice, that there just isn't the shore-fast ice to protect the beach anymore. And so you get those big bluffs instead of sort of the nice shoreline or nice beach that we saw in your earlier photos from the 40s and the 70s. A lot of those beaches are gone now. It's just really abrupt.
Yeah.
So it would be, in relation to your question, Karen, it would be much more difficult to launch a boat from those big bluffs that it would have been potentially in the 40s and the 70s. Although I don't know much about those time periods, but So.
Yeah, we're hoping for next summer. I'm still waiting to actually see what kind of funding I'm going to have for fiscal year 18, but the plan is to try to get back up and continue doing some more survey, particularly in the northwest portion of the NPRA along the coast, and then I'm hoping that that we might even be able to take a look at the Chukchi Sea coast as well, in the NPRA, and so those, yeah, there's a lot of continuation with this project that I'm hoping for.
Okay, great. Any other questions before maybe we move on to the next presentation?
Yeah, I have one. This is Simon at NSF. I think each of the locations that you described had people who were living who could tell you more about the site.
Yeah.
Is that how is that a way you use to prioritize what you look at, or is it just
no, the
chosen today?
Yeah, it's actually more luck that that there are family members, or even in the case of Lillian, that you know, people who actually lived at these places
Right.
are still alive, or at least, you know, a generation later. But no, that hasn't been so much at least for what's been done so far, the way that things are being prioritized. It's more just what's the highest risk, but things are still kind of evolving, and you know, since I came on here at BLM last December, and you know, I'm just trying to get to know people at you know, at ICAS and at the native village of Barrow, and you know, speaking with Tommy and other people, just trying to get to know more people up in the communities that, you know, maybe they have ideas, you know, places that we can maybe prioritize that just we don't know about yet. So yeah, it's kind of an evolving process currently.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. Should we move on to the next talk, Carolina?
Sorry, but I'm sorry, I muted myself. Would it be okay if I ask Joe one quick question?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, Joe, this is, and if I don't mean it to be a trick question. I was just out of curiosity. There's so many different pieces that I've heard from people that correlate to erosion rates from lots of hunting sites, from hunting camps, to even safeguarding kind of proprietary rights or cultural rights. So ensuring that the artifacts that if they are coming from, for example, in Inuit culture, that they're maintained within the area. And then to chemical questions of is this how does this change the composition of the nearshore water and things like that. I was just wondering if there's oftentimes within your discipline or in the work that you do, if there's also oftentimes people from other disciplines coming in to collaborate in looking at those many different kind of pieces that are related to erosion.
Yeah, and since I've been here, we haven't had that, but it's only been a year now since I've been with the Bureau of Land Management. I'm hoping to that's actually one of my goals, is to try to pull together some resources, not just for the logistics of things, but also to have more comprehensive studies of these places. So yeah, not just looking at the culture, but hopefully, you know, understanding the mechanics of the erosion better, and you know, the different effects that might have, you know, both in terms of what's going on today and you know, how these things actually do affect the cultural resources. But yeah, so far there hasn't been that. Beyond the biggest collaboration so far has just been trying to get the community involvement in the process. So making sure that you know, that the local tribes know what's going on, and trying to make sure that that the families that are associated with these places, that they have the representation, and that they have the involvement in the process, and that these things can go back to the communities and you know, and be shared. So I don't know if does that answer your question, or?
It does completely. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Joe, and
Yeah,
thank
no
you
problem.
for the work that you do. Were there, before I move on, were there any other questions for Joe? Okay, then we'll move to Sven Haarkanson, and Sven is going to share with us, his presentation is titled Pin Arts Journals and Journeys, Understanding Aleutian Seascapes. And I'll just let Sven take it from here.
All right. Well, first of all, hello, and thank you guys for inviting me to come and share. Can you see my presentation?
No, not yet. You're going to have to share your screen.
Okay, so let's see, where are we on that? In Zoom, so where do we go to that?
Towards the bottom of the screen, there's a green share screen button.
Oh, sorry, there it is. Okay, got it. All right. Okay, you guys see that?
We can see your desktop. There we go.
Okay. All right, well, first of all, thank you. I'm going to be talking about this guy named Alphonse Pinard, who I've had the privilege to do a lot of research on him, but mainly because he was in Kodiak, Alaska. He was in Alaska in 1871, 72. He was 18 years old at the time. He was trying to understand the peopling of the Americas through linguistics. So he did some pretty extensive writing and collected some amazing stories. But this past summer, I had the privilege to take a boat from Kodiak to Atka and back. And so what I tried to do in that time was to look at where Pinard went and where he was taken by the Unangan men, because he kayaked from Unalaska to Kodiak in, was it September, October, and November. And so they went from site to site kayaking. It took them about 3 months. And if you guys understand Alaska weather, that's not the best time to go. So I had the privilege to go and look at that. And in that process, and as we were doing as I was going out and looking at these different places, I started trying to think differently about how I can look at not only his historical journals, or his journals, but also start to think about where these Unangan men were taking him. How do we understand the seascape? Because we talk about the landscape, but my people, I'm originally from Kodiak Island, born and raised in the village of Old Harbor, so Alaska native. How do we understand the world from the ocean, not from the land? And so trying to sort of flip what I was looking at and trying to read between the lines of what Pinard collected. So here's Pinard, and he took some of the earliest photographs in 1871. And here's my mom. I worked with my mom. I've been working with her for over a decade on translating Pinard's journals. You can see them here. And what we're going from his journals, which are both in French, Russian, and archaic Qalluvik. And so translating those has taken a long time. I've worked with another colleague who has helped us translate the French. And so here's what we have to work with. And I worked with my mom and 2 other elders, and it took us 2 years to translate the songs that he collected in 1872. And so just as an example of what we ended up with, coordinating the songs with the masks. And so he collected masks as well, and that's a whole nother story, but the masks now reside in Boulogne-sur-Mer, France. And I'll come back to that point. But so going through this process, you know, it was pretty amazing to have the privilege to see songs, because we don't have songs that had survived the, I want to say the extermination of our people, but the extermination of our culture. And so going back to be able to look at the songs, to bring them back, put them back into a living context, working with Lydia Black's work and Dr. Jeff Lear. So working with scholars who've done amazing work, but then working with the elders to bring that back. And so here's some of the things that we translated. For example, Payaulik, which is the bringer of food. It's the Ikayopa Alingolaniwana ni Alchudamkan Ochwit Piao Puyawatni Unani Ochtukamgan. And so translating that, it's about taking the songs and sharing them with the community. Like when we started, elders are very Christian. They're like, while those masks and all that stuff is all evil, they're horrible, they're terrible. Well, that's the cultural inculcation of Christianity and the showing how primitive we are as savages and etc. But then you start thinking about these songs. And so by the time we got done working and translating these songs, it was a 2-year project. The elder, who was a staunch Christian, goes, wow, these songs are about taking care of each other. They're not about satanic worship. So changing that perspective was important. And here's where Pinard went. He came into San Francisco, went up to Unalaska, and then from there he took a schooner up into the Bering Sea, and they came back, and then he kayaked from Unalaska to Kodiak, and then he took a boat back. And the part I had the privilege to do is to go and look at all the places that he went during his kayak trip. And looking at his journals, and I ended up getting a journal that hasn't been published yet, which I find very interesting. But I'm working on that now, and then also working with his photographs. And so that also adds an important factor to some of the data that I'm looking at. And the other important thing too, though, is he wrote down a lot of Alutiiq words that had disappeared because our language was suppressed, because of all this stuff. The words, like for example, in kayaking, we don't have those words that the elders remember. And so it was wonderful to find in his journals, and I only found this stuff about 3 years ago. And so piecing together that, bringing that knowledge back to a living context, and then figuring out where he went, where the Unangan men took him while they were kayaking from Kodiak from Unalaska to Kodiak. And in that process, so I looked at those, and so these are all the different places, and this is where I went this summer. I happened to go on a private boat. This guy was interested in exploring the Aleutians, and he said, hey, what do you want to do? And it's like, well, there's a project I could never really afford to do. I would like to look at where Pinard went, where the Unangan men took him. And so we started off in Kodiak, went to Old Harbor where I grew up, and then from there we made our trek out all the way to Atka, and he was interested in going there because there's a crashed B-24D Liberator, and his wife's relative died in that plane in the Mediterranean during World War II. And there's only 8 of those that exist, and so his goal was to go out there, and so I sort of hopped on this boat to go. And here's our crew, the Tesla, with the owner of Jim Fulford. And we went. There's the boat. So it was to me, it was luxurious because I grew up on salmon boats, and this is a yacht. We went, and our first stop was Chirikov, and then we stopped in the Shimigans. And then we ended up getting stuck in False Pass for 3 days because of a big storm. And from there, we went to a former base here to look at some stuff. And from there, we stopped at the Four Mountains, and then out to Atka. And then on our way back, excuse me, we stopped off at a couple of different sites, and then I'll talk a little bit about those as we went, and comparing Pinard's journals to what we saw. Our first stop was in Chirikov Island, and again, the challenges of erosion to sites is pretty extensive. And so a lot of what happened in Chirikov, from what I had heard from Patrick Saltonstall, is there's about a mile of beach that disappeared in this one area we were looking. So to find anything archaeological, we were lucky to see. This is an artifact that goes back about 3,000 years. I didn't pick anything up because I didn't have the permits, but I did photograph them. But when we got to the Shumigan Islands, some of the first things I started looking at is in Pinard, he didn't write in these journals or draw in these journals, but he drew on slips of paper the places that he was at and the places he visited for collecting ethnographic pieces. This one is called Bird Island, and it's right in the middle of the Shumigans. And so if you could look at your screen there and see Bird Island, and then the photograph that morning we saw on July 4th and this summer. So his drawings are pretty accurate from his perspective. And so it was wonderful to actually start to collaborate and corroborate all of this information. Then we stopped off in Unang. It was another village that was abandoned in 1968 when they closed the school and then closed the post office. And I have on the right-hand side of the screen some of the stuff he wrote in these journals, or not these journals, actually, these slips of paper, which I found fascinating because he starts to talk about being led to these different cave sites by the Unangan men. And in one of his journals, or his slips of paper, he talks about the cave sites, and you can see from there trying to transcribe it is always a challenge. And he talks about going into these cave sites and finding them and being led there by the Unangan men. And then what happens is he writes, because of their superstition, I didn't take anything. I was like, okay, great. Well, how does he end up with all of these Sukhbit, Alutik, and Unangan masks in the collection in Pinard? So he is led there. He remembered where they were. Then when he wasn't with the natives, he went back and took them. And so I finally found some information about what he did by piecing together that. So that's something that's interesting. This abandoned village, going back one slide here, is Unga. And so as you can see, it's in a pretty state, pretty much disappearing. And that would be a whole nother project to look at for another scholar. But we got to see that. And then we stopped off at False Pass, and looking at his journals, again, he had a map, which this is all in Russian, of False Pass here, where we ended up getting stuck for 3 days because of the weather. So collaborating what he wrote there to going out in False Pass, to stopping off at different sites, and also dealing with the weather. When we stopped off on the beach, it was flat calm. But within a half hour, you could see the waves that had come up pretty fast. And in fact, their boat swamped on the way back out to the boat to drop off the two passengers. And luckily, nothing bad happened. But because of that, it made us very wary about how fast the weather changes and how dangerous it is for everybody. And in fact, this last summer, they lost the fishing vessel where everybody drowned. Because of the weather's changing so fast. So that's another factor that's impacting us as natives, is we can't predict the weather anymore. And this is something I've asked the elders at home, where they were like, well, before you had a day to predict the weather, now you've got a couple hours. And even the weather folks can't tell that in those local areas. So from Ugamak to the Island of Four Mountains, we came across a herd of a walrus, which was fun and surprising to see, and heading over to looking at an abandoned military base. Again, that's whole nother site to look at historically. It gives you an idea of what we're looking at. And then we didn't stop on the islands, but we went by Anangula, which is one of the earliest sites, about 9,000 years old. That was excavated. So I would love to have been able to stop on the island, but because of a big storm, we weren't able to. And our goal was to go here, which we did. We stopped off when we got to see this plane, which is in pretty good condition, but it's been vandalized by people who stop in there, people taking pieces. In fact, one of the propellers that had been, looked like somebody took some saws and cut off the blades there, but bits and pieces, and then all the interior has been pretty much ransacked. On our way back, through the island of Four Mountains, I was interested in just seeing where Pinard went, and so looking at where he collected masks from. We didn't go on shore because we didn't. Again, these are sacred sites, and not having the permits or permission by the people, the communities. I didn't want to touch anything or even be attempted to touch anything. And then we stopped off at Makushkin Bay to get some aerial photography for Rick Knick, because he talked about this site with me, and looking at some of these interesting features that were there, because they don't understand what they mean or what they're for. This is 62 meters long by about 3 meters wide, and we don't know why that's there, and there's been no explanation. And so it's an interesting thing to think about and look at. And then we stopped off at Unalaska at the Museum of the Aleutians, and I shared what we were doing with them. And so there's some ideas to start working with. And then we stopped off at another site, which was interesting for me because it's an entire longhouse that goes from one side of the beach all the way to the other, using a drone footage, we were able to get aerial photography of it and to get a good survey of that site to see what was there. But now, getting back to Pinard, I was trying to find out exactly where he went to see if we can find any of the sites and where they camped. So we stopped off at Tigalda Island and then Ugamak. Here, again, comparing his notes and journals to understanding where they stopped. Like, they stopped here on this island for 3 days before they kayaked over to Ugamak. And what was amazing about that was looking at how they hopped from island to island, watching the weather and the tides and the currents, which is something that we only, well, people in the Aleutians have to deal with more than what we do within Kodiak. But again, you could see his journals were pretty accurate. So I was able to compare photographs and then his journals and seen the sites to going to places that didn't quite match up. Like Unum Island is now called Deer Island. And so the island names have changed from 1871 to looking at, again, another abandoned village site. What was left there is a BIA school that's there. The church they burned down, the Orthodox faith. Whenever they leave a church, they burn it down. To going to Belkofski, and that was Belkofski. And on to this place called Voznesensky Island in his journals, but it's called Voznesensky on the current maps. And so at this site, he ran into and wrote down meeting an Unangan man who was over 100 years old, and he was 20 years old when he converted to Christianity. And I think at that time, I think he was about 12 years old when Cook passed by that area. But the site and the village where they were is now completely eroded away. There's nothing there. But again, you could see where you could see a fire pit, and again, another bladelet that's about 2,000 to 3,000 years old. And then we went to Bird Island where he collected masks and looking at different caves. Like, this is a cave site that if you didn't know where it was, and there's nothing in there, everything's been taken out. But there's cave sites around the island that have already been mapped and surveyed, to going to Perryville. And when we were in Perryville, I started talking with an elder, and she's 92 years old. And I wanted to ask her about place names, but they don't have those place names anymore. those names have been forgotten. And in this village, the community moved there, most of the community moved there in 1912 after the Katmai eruption. And so taking Pinard's journals and what he wrote and what he learned from both the Unangan and Alutiiq people, I was able to start to learn more about the place names, the original place names. And so I'm hoping to be able to work with the communities of Perryville and Chignik to get that information back, you know, thanks to Pinard's journals. And, you know, going to Chignik, to coming to Kodiak. And here is a project I've been working on for about 16 years, working with the village of, working with the village. And one of the things I wanted to mention from the previous presentation is, you know, these are all important things that you talked about: collaboration with the community, cultural ownership, the long-term care for sites, creating that knowledge and that connection that our communities have. And then how do you prioritize what you preserve? And so these are important things that I've been addressing and had the privilege to work with the village of Augamaok. And that's on a video that I'll show at the end of this presentation, to going back to bringing back, you know, why do this kind of trip? And again, it really taught me about looking at not just the landscape is what we're taught to do as archaeologists, but the seascape. How do we understand where you would pick a site from the sea? And then how, I'm amazed that the Unangan men from Unalaska knew exactly where to go safely to get Pinard all the way to Kodiak in those 3 months while they kayaked, and where to get food and all these other things that I'm interested in trying to think about. How do we not only relearn, but try to share this knowledge with our communities so it's relevant? And then to talk about site preservation, I've had the privilege to work with Rick Knick from Quinnahock at the Nunashek site. And I think you guys have probably seen that. He had the National Geographic coverage. And, you know, why dig that site? And why, you know, why keep going back? What's happening what's happening as the permafrost is thawing? It's not just eroding, it's everything underneath that is rotting. And talking with the community members from both Bethel and all the surrounding villages, there are numerous sites in that region that are, that can yield this kind of information that Rick and his team has been able to not only excavate, but preserve. And the thing with what Rick has been doing is the community has complete ownership of that material. He's right now preserving it, and it all goes back within the next year to that community of Quinnahock. And so creating that kind of collaborative, open research, exchange, knowledge, and ownership is really, really important for us to think about. And coming from Kodiak, when in the 80s, Rick excavated a site on the southwest side of Kodiak called Qalluvik. And they excavated that site for about 4 years, and then they stopped because they, one, ran out of money, but there was no interest. About 3 years later, a storm came in and destroyed the site entirely. And they were only able to excavate a quarter of the site. So that all that information is gone. And that site itself has been inspirational for us to ask more questions about this guy named Pinard, about material culture that we thought we never had. So again, thinking about that kind of collaboration, but the importance of finding a way to not only excavate, but preserve and sustain, take this information and sustain it. And so it's really important to think about how can we get support to these communities, or even get students or other individuals to go out and dig these sites and preserve them, because they're thawing and rotting in the ground, you know, because of the what's happening globally. And again, I'm just going to show a quick video. I don't know if you can click on that, Carolina.
I should be
Meredith?
able to, if you will stop sharing your screen, I can take over and share mine.
Okay. Okay, I will do that.
And we haven't tried this yet, so hopefully it will work. Let me know if it does not.
Yeah, and you guys can turn the music down. This came with the program. This is Cape Alatak, and that site, I've had the privilege to work with the village of Augamaok in documenting petroglyphs, but thinking about long-term projects that are meaningful and relevant to the communities. And that's something that is important to think about when we're doing our research is how do you make the information relevant? How do you make it accessible to the communities? And that means doing collaborative work, but making sure that it's not just consultation. It's working with the community so that they feel that they own and know they own the information as well. And again, that it becomes valuable to why we are doing what we're doing. This site here, as you're looking, I found another 9 petroglyphs that I've been walking by for 16 years because of the certain sunlight. There's 9 petroglyphs on that site right there, those rocks. But there's over 1,300 petroglyphs that I found. And when we started, we thought there was only 300. So we found over 1,000 new petroglyphs over the past 16 years and slowly, systematically documenting them. One of the things that's happened over the last 10 years is we've got bigger storms. They're more powerful. We've got more icing now. So these petroglyphs are eroding much more rapidly than they were before. Again, it's an important site for Kodiak, but also I think just for thinking about how would we document preserving it even if it does get lost to natural erosion. Here, there's about 300 to 400 petroglyphs in this one grouping of rocks. The next shot, you'll see Roy pouring water over the petroglyphs, and that is the least damaging and probably the more accessible way of photographing these petroglyphs. And that way you're not putting any chalk or actually doing any rubbings on them. And so it's thinking about how to preserve the sites, but teach community members how to do that as well. So they understand that this is, instead of destroying the sites by trying to get photographs, they have an easier way to document them for themselves. Because there's probably anywhere from 50 to 100 people that stop by this site every summer, both fishermen and even researchers who come out. And we've had people from China and Arizona come up to look at these petroglyphs. And here it's a site that's 45 minutes away from the village of Augamaok, and it's only accessible by skiff unless you fly out there, but you also have to get permission from the corporation to go on their land. And so we have permission, and we've been using it as a culture camp where we've been doing different arts. Last year, the last 2 years, we built a traditional Onyak, which is the first one we built on Kodiak since the 1860s, and there's my crew. So it's really working with the community and getting them to have that ownership and knowledge so that we're growing it and it's relevant. I think that's it there. Thanks, Meredith.
Mm.
Thank you, Sven. That was a wonderful presentation. Does anybody have any questions for Sven?
This is Steve Street in Bethel. Can you hear me, Sven?
Yeah, hi, Steve.
Hi. Yeah, I loved seeing your footage from the Aleutians, by the way. And one thing that really strikes me is compared to the sites I'm familiar with here in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, it looks like quite a few of the sites you showed us were pretty stable. And I would interpret that as being because they're relatively pretty high compared to the elevation of most sites along the coast and the shorelines that we're familiar with. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And also, we're not dealing with thawing permafrost. And so it's a lot different in the Aleutians. The thing within the Aleutians is the storms are getting bigger and more powerful. So the sites that are there are being eroded faster, but I didn't show any of those.
Yeah, thank you for acknowledging that, Sven. This is Karen Pletnikoff with the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association. We have a number of important sites because we have so many of them, but we are fortunate that it's the sea action and not the permafrost giving way that's the primary driver. Thanks so much for that really interesting information. The protection of our sites long term, whether that erosion is coming from increased icing, increased sea storminess, loss of permafrost. We've got a lot at stake in coastal Alaska, and especially in the light of how frequently we are readjusting when Alaskans first came here, when our different peoples first settled or used different sites over different time periods is constantly being adjusted back. There's a lot to be learned before some of these really important areas might be gone. Thanks.
Yeah, this is Simon. I was just wondering where do you find the materials, the written materials from Pinot? Do you have to go to France to get them, or what's the source?
Hi, Simon. The actual journals are at the Bancroft Library in Berkeley, California. And they're not all coordinated. I mean, if you don't know, his journals are pretty extensive, and I think they're really, really valuable. It's like just the kayaking from Unalaska to Kodiak, he has 114 pages, and I found another 67 pages in a different journal. And so but those are at the Bancroft Library.
Okay.
So his journals are in the United States. His actual collections are in France.
Okay. Well, I think you made a point that I hadn't realized. Just the painstaking work that you're doing, translating both his version of the languages at the time and of course the language he was writing in. So that's really quite an amazing effort to sort of reform people's understanding of what they saw then.
And I'm also, fighting the challenge of my mom is now 78 years old. So, trying to keep working with her. And I think there's only 13, no, actually we just lost one last week. 12 fluent speakers in Sukhston, Alutiiq. So, I've got a lot of work to get done in the next couple of years.
Thank you, Sven. You mentioned when talking about some of the areas about the importance of the artifacts going back to the community, and I was wondering from both you and also Steve Streaks, I know that Steve has talked to me a little bit about this too, of some of the challenges of making sure that there's facilities to house those artifacts.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you and Steve could share a little bit about that.
Steve, do you want to go?
Yeah, well, I can make a couple comments, Sven. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot to share visually for you. I wasn't prepared to do that today, but I think the Nunathluk situation in Quinnahock's a perfect example to kind of illustrate the challenges we have out here. because I know we don't have a lot of capacity in this region, and our regional museum here at the moment doesn't have a lot of capacity to deal with these large collections. And the fallback strategy, you know, from Rick Connect's project is that all of those collections are going to have to go back to the community during 2018, and at the moment they will be at a repository in Qalluvik, which is both kind of good and bad. It's good that the village itself controls that project, controls and owns the collections, has 100% authority about what's done with the project and collections, but then they also kind of get stuck with 100% of the responsibility and the cost too. And that's a huge challenge and very concerning for all of us too, because I think Qalluvik going to need a lot of help and a lot of collaboration with the Alaskan museum community, at least, to take care of those collections, preserve them, you know, give access to researchers in the community to study and use them, and all of that. So we're all aware that there's some huge challenges out here, and there's not really much money available from anywhere right now to deal with those private collections too. So just the tip of the iceberg. This will be a real test case for us out here, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to be honest about all the other issues that the villages are dealing with you know, the opioid or the drugs, basically, all the drug abuse and the other social issues that they're dealing with. And those are things that are of concern, because should the community be spending the money on, you know, this kind of endeavor where they need to be caring for other issues? And I mean, these are really, you are right, these are very tough issues and tough questions to think about. You know, if we do dig these sites up, how do we not only preserve them, but are we going to burden the communities with that cost? I ran a museum in Kodiak for 13 years, and I spent most of my time, actually all my time, working with my staff to raise money and get donations. And so it's a challenge that is something that we should consider, and an issue, or not an issue, but a reality. It's great to, I think, preserve the sites, preserve the information, which we're also dealing with the fact that these are not only rotting in the ground, but if we don't do something, they're going to be gone forever. So it's a catch-22 for us. So what do we do? You know, this is where, you know, as I appreciated hearing a lot of you who are on the line that, you know, work at not only the government level, but at a level where you can say, you know, this is going to be, we need to make this a priority. Helping create cultural centers, or helping create a place where we can care for those, whether it's regional or local, and finding a way to make it sustainable. If we don't do something, this information is going to be gone to all of us. And, you know, it's not just the local communities, it's, I think, a national thing. How do we get our communities to take ownership in our, go ahead.
Oh, well, I'm excited to even have this conversation, because I know how difficult it is for organizations like ours to, like you say, to even let this issue float up to the surface, because there's so many other really immediate priorities that we've got now, like social issues, lack of money for basic human services. And so, you know, that's why the museum here in Bethel doesn't float up in everybody's priorities. And that's why it's so difficult for us to even keep the doors open at the moment, frankly. Huge challenge. I'm glad we're starting this conversation though, because it makes me feel less like we're completely isolated out here on this issue, and there's just so little capacity to cope with this problem.
Yeah. Well, you're not isolated. It's a challenge for all of us.
This is Brene. I'm here with Carolina. I also work for ICC. I'm the Cultural Sustainability Advisor. I just wanted to add another comment to that in regards to your issues that you brought up and everything else that our communities are trying to work through as priorities. But this is a part of self-identity that's really important to the issues here. And I think realization of that is really important.
Mm-hmm. No, it is important because, I mean, I briefly touched on, like, for example, what Qalluvik did and the information that we've learned and we've been able to bring back, because I had the privilege to work in the villages. And I say privilege because I spent 1 week a year in each of the villages on Kodiak, bringing the information we gathered that Rick had dug up. And taking how to not only look at that archaeological piece, but how the kids and adults can actually make those pieces and understand them culturally. We did basket weaving, bentwood bowls, mask carving, fish skin sewing, all this information that had been dug up. And the idea was to show that, you know, as I started, we're not dumb, primitive peoples. And show that the community, how rich and knowledgeable they were locally, and utilizing all the materials and resources right there to thrive for thousands of years. And so changing the kids, and in fact, I feel that it had some impact in dealing with some of the abuses that we were facing, whether it was alcohol, drugs, sexual, all this other stuff. It helped change our kids. Because you raise the kids up to show them how amazing they are. They carry themselves with a sense of dignity that carries over into their school, into their decisions. So start raising healthier community members from the start. You're muted.
Thank you so much. There's 2 questions here on the board for you also. Thank you very much for adding that part, by the way. Joseph has a quick question. He's wondering, have you been able to observe or test the amount of erosion on the petroglyphs? Are you able to estimate the amount of surface that is lost each year? And then another person also has a question about the petroglyphs in wondering if it is possible to make casts out of the petroglyphs or of the petroglyphs.
Other than just observation of the erosion on petroglyphs, I haven't actually sat down and tested that, but that is actually, Joseph, I appreciate you asking that question because I will make that something I will work with the community on. To say, okay, let's start monitoring this. You know, I mean, other than just what I see that's sort of hard, or things that are disappearing. I will actually make that part of what I do next year. For the other one, the challenge with making casts, and I tried doing that, is when you put anything over those petroglyphs, it kills any of the covering that it, or erases, or basically wipes off all the patina that's on the petroglyphs. And so then it exposes them even more. And so I did a couple of tests on a couple of different petroglyphs, I mean, with the permission from the community. And it wasn't, I was really disappointed in myself for even doing that, because it exposed the petroglyphs to even faster erosion after that. And so I just don't ever want to do that again. And so now I think what we need to do is just figure out how to do better, not only better documentation, but rubbings, or even using something to do 3D. I mean, those are things I haven't gone into yet because I can't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
This is Steve again, real quickly. Can I interject a comment on that, Sven?
Yeah.
Have you thought at all of doing terrestrial LiDAR or get three-dimensional scanning out there, because that's getting to be pretty reasonable to try to do that nowadays. You might be able to just set up terrestrial LiDAR and have somebody come up on contract to come out and scan those rock art faces, and then at least you'd have baseline data for what they look like now. And that it might be kind of expensive initially to do that, but it might be the easiest way to get the best resolution data.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to do something like that, but we are running a culture camp where it's basically out of pocket, or, you know, we raise about $5,000 to bring community members out there. And most of our money is spent on travel for their.
Gotcha.
So that's our primary focus. That's been our primary focus. But I will keep that in mind. Thank you, Steve.
Well, I hear you. Is that site's on Village Corporation land, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll try to dream something up, maybe.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great. There is another comment here from Ambrose, and Ambrose, I might ask you to say out loud what this is, but I'll try to read it. It asks, was the peat used in an area because the mysterious 60-meter long feature looks like what I have seen in Shetland, northern Norway, where peat is used for fuel in construction?
They would take the sides of moss and the sides of the hills to use as the walls. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments that they would like to bring forward? We're just coming up on the close to the meeting, and I wondered, I know that this is both Joe and Sven are very passionate about the work that they do, and we're very appreciative of their passion in that work. And I have also heard that it's very challenging for multiple reasons, of needing to have more disciplines involved, needing to have more money involved, needing to have more interest from the universities. Given what both of you have shared, I wonder if either of you have some kind of closing comments that you would like to share and think about, even in the ways of building the communication, as Steve said, of enjoying that this conversation has started, of ways of building upon that, even if that can move things in the direction of what you guys would like to see. Do you have any closing thoughts on that?
Well, I guess, yeah, one of the things that that I would like to see in the future is just more interest from, you know, just beyond you know, us here at the BLM, you know, and getting a small team of archaeologists together. I'd like to see a lot more from grad students and interest, not just from the students, but also from professors that specialize in Alaskan archaeology, particularly for these sites. They're historic sites, which you know, unfortunately doesn't tend to be quite as you know, quite as sexy as the, you know, Pleistocene points and animal bones. But yeah, just getting more people interested, and yeah, and hopefully getting more of the community involved, and you know, I guess, you know, that's the main thing that I'm hoping to hopefully build up and work on.
Thank you, Joe. Sven, did you have any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Joe, completely. You make some really good points there. And then the other thing too is thinking about what Stephen and I were talking about, with how do we not only dig this stuff up, but how do we create a way for the communities to keep that information at home or in their communities so it's relevant, and also are there ways we can help these communities that we work with to have the support to create repositories so that the information doesn't end up outside of the state or outside of their villages. I don't think there's anything wrong with the villages caring for the collections. It's them having the funds necessary to care for them would make all the difference. And so thinking about that discussion, because there are a lot of sites just within the Bethel region that would yield a lot of information. And I've just heard from several different individuals while I was waiting at the airport. Oh, we have a couple of things that are eroding out of the bank. We have, preserved organics or preserved artifacts. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And you are right in getting more students out there and getting professors interested, but also creating a way that it's sustainable in the long term.
Thank you so much, Sven, and thank you both, Joe and Sven. I've learned a lot from these two presentations and the conversations today, and I'm sure that everybody else has.